and it seems they are in favor of having a second referendum. But of course, they have to be independent first, right? They have to decide to get away from Britain, right? So can they have a second referendum?
There is no mechanism in place for within the EU where one country breaks up and one bit stays and one bit goes away. It would have to be a completely new process. And I think, if I'm very honest with you, there are concerns that other countries would have who are members of the EU who have similar issues of communes, of different languages. Now, are we going to end up in a situation where we all sort of have little bits of countries sort of reforming themselves? I don't rule it out in terms of, is that the way the EU is going to progress in decades to come? But certainly, as far as the British government is concerned, this is not an issue that's currently on the table.
And even Northern Ireland voted 56% to remain. There are speculations that Northern Ireland is now looking at reuniting with its EU neighbor, the Republic of Ireland. You think this is going to happen?
Well, again, our Prime Minister made an early visit to Dublin to discuss this issue, and the one thing she agreed with the Irish Prime Minister on is that this border that we have will not return to being a closed border. This is why we came up with the Good Friday Peace Agreement. This is why terrorists and combatants who previously fought with each other now govern together. Nobody's going to jeopardize that overnight. I think the idea that somehow the issues that divided Ireland in the first place are going to be put aside and suddenly this is a better option is not, I don't think, viable. I think what we do need to do is to ensure that the benefits of being so close to another EU country are fully realized.
Yeah. So post-Brexit, what will happen to the Europeans living in Britain?
Well, that is again something that our ministers are now considering. One of the things that they've said is that in the immediate future, nobody needs to worry about it because we're not suddenly going to make a big change that will affect everybody. There is some concern if people think, well, this is a once and for all opportunity, so let's get inside the UK immediately using our rights. I think at some point the government will have to look at whether measures need to be taken to address that. But behind your question, and one of the reasons I've heard as to why we wanted to look at this issue was that the pressures on our system, on housing, welfare, and the opportunities that the economy could deliver were such that people were wondering whether this was in any way in the longer term sustainable.
Mm-hmm. What about freedom of movement? Will there be travel controls? Is it going to be more difficult to get a visa now after this Brexit?
Yeah, I think sometimes people confuse the two, which is the right to settle and work, and the freedom of movement. The freedom of movement is whether we want to restrict short-term tourism in and out of the UK. Now, I can't imagine for a moment that we would look to our European neighbours and say, these are not tourists we want. I mean, after all, we've had millions of tourists coming in and out of the UK, and vice versa. So it's in our interests to retain that. So I really don't see somehow that the risk-based assessment that we make of every country, of people coming and actually not simply being a short-term tourist but using it as a backdoor to stay for a longer time, will suddenly rise coming out of the EU. So the assurance that I can give is that based on what I know, the objective of the UK is not to make it more difficult for our European neighbours to visit the UK. Far from it.
Yeah. Well, now, how would you describe your relationship with the European Union?
Well, firstly, we are a member of the European Union until we stop being a member of the European Union. So, for example, here in the Philippines, our regular monthly meeting of ambassadors takes place. We still coordinate on areas where we pool our resources. I've just agreed locally to help our fellow EU member countries prepare better for any contingency in the typhoon season, for example, because of the experience we've had with dealing with Yolanda. We've also been doing a lot of work on earthquakes, and in fact, some of the work we did with the Philippine government and the MMDA has now been absorbed into the way in which you do your drills and things. The maps that we gave to the city are being used. So there are areas where we are cooperating, there are areas where we need them. The EU is spending about 3 times more in development assistance here in the Philippines, which we obviously fund as a member state. Those programs will continue. So until the very last day, we will be active members of the EU, and even beyond it, it's in a way it's like saying, do we work with the United States or do we work with Japan or Korea? I mean, any major political and economic bloc is important, and we have one of the largest diplomatic network in the world, almost equal with France, and maybe the United States has a slightly bigger one. So we have this huge global footprint, and we have an embassy in every single European country with consulates all over the place. So these vital engagements will continue.
I know it will take a while, but have you set a certain number of years when Brexit will have to be completed?
No, there's been no timetable. The only thing that we know from the treaty that allows this exit is that from the day the UK chooses, there is a 24-month period by which time negotiations have to be completed, unless the other member states agree to extend it.
Up next, we will be talking about the bilateral relationship between the UK and the Philippines, so don't go away. Back on Bridging Borders, and we still have the British ambassador with us. How would you describe the relationship of the UK and the Philippines?
Well, it starts from the premise that we want to invest more in our relationship. When I first arrived here, the last time anybody of cabinet rank visited the Philippines was in 1997, long time ago. I've had 3 cabinet level ministers here in my time. Last year we had the Queen's eldest daughter, Princess Anne, who returned to the Philippines after 16 years. And these connections will continue. I already described my embassy as being twice as big in the 3 years that I've been here, and it's one of the largest in Asia Pacific because of the other operations that we actually have. And we've been very successful here in our foreign policy work, in our work that we've done in supporting the peace process in the South, in terms of trade investment, 38% increase in British exports to the Philippines last year, from 0 to about £1 billion worth of investment from the Philippines. So 70 billion pesos has moved from here, invested in the UK. That didn't exist before. And with the previous administration and with this, we have very strong connections and links. I've already met 15 of the incoming secretaries. I saw Mayor Duterte 2 days before he decided to run for the presidency, and we sat in a room and talked for 3 hours. I saw him as president-elect in Davao just before, and then a few times obviously since, but on much more formal occasions.
And how do you find him?
Well, I find him how the people of the Philippines find him. Somebody who's very direct, somebody who doesn't want to get lost in protocol and formalities, he gets straight to the point. And he has some very, very clear ideas of what he wants to do. Now, the area that we are 100% supportive of is the 10-point economic plan, right from the top, to liberalizing the marketplace, to focusing on reproductive health, to invest in science. All of these things are vital, so we are fully signed up to the economic agenda. And those are areas where we can work on together. On the peace process, both with the NPA and others, and with the southern provinces, I think this is something that we've been working on this since 2008.
Mm-hmm. What about the BBL?
Yeah, I've said this before, that it's not that we support the BBL or BBL version 2 or the old one, the one that the Supreme Court ruled. What we're interested in is a peace process that everybody signs up to, that has a legal backing, that then is backed by resources both from the Philippine government and international donors and business investment, so that people have livelihoods and have reasons to live and work peacefully. Education, a huge big gap. Healthcare, these things need to be fixed, but you can't do this in an environment where there's insecurity. So whichever alphabet you want to apply to the peace process, if it's MNLF, MILF, CAB, BBL, I'm reasonably indifferent to all of that. What we really want is a constitutional agreement. And if there are things that need to be amended later on when the Constitution is revised from time to time, they can fix those. But right now I think the focus should be on what will actually get this peace process back on track and quickly.
UK was one of the first countries to support the private-public partnership. Can you tell us why you were one of the first?
Because we were the pioneers this goes way back to when Margaret Thatcher, our first woman prime minister, was in charge. She felt that the government had owned too many things, had no business running an airline or trains, or even running power stations or water utility plants. So we went through a whole process of privatization first. That was the first, if you like, transition. But what it does, it brings private capital and private expertise into